Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Kellogg College. It's great to see you all here this evening on such a lovely evening that you've chosen to sit here for an hour and hear what I think is going to be a really fascinating seminar. My name is Juliet Carpenter. I'm Director of Research at the Global Centre on Healthcare and Urbanisation, that's GCHU. And we're delighted to welcome you to the GCHU Public Seminar Series. So GCHU, for those who don't know, brings together interests within Kellogg community in the areas of sustainable urban development and health and well-being. So really, what creates healthy places, what creates healthy cities. And one of the ways in which we're doing this is through this seminar series, which has been running for over 6 years in partnership with the King's Foundation, and we're very grateful to them for their support. And it takes place in the 1st and 8th week of the university terms. So for tonight's seminar on Can the Arts Heal, I'm delighted to introduce our guest chair for the seminar, Dr. Fiona Whitehouse, who herself is a practicing artist and academic and is currently head of the internship office at the university. So thanks very much, Fiona, for chairing this session, and over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's a real pleasure to be chairing this conversation on a question that is at once deeply personal to everybody and increasingly evidence-based. Can the arts heal? I want to begin not with data or policy, but with a moment a few years ago when, during a tricky period in my life, I found myself standing in front of a painting at Tate Britain. Ben Nicholson's wonderful 1928. It's a painting of the foothills in Cumberland. It's not a dramatic or overwhelming landscape. In fact, it's quite restrained. Brownish, muted tones, gentle forms, a quiet sense of order. And yet, standing there in that moment, I became aware of something shifting in me physically. My breathing slowed, my shoulders dropped, and there was a very real sense of calm. I wasn't analysing the painting. I wasn't thinking about technique or composition. It was something more immediate than that. The painting just did something to me. And I suspect many of you in this room tonight will recognise that kind of moment, whether it's a painting, a piece of music, a poem, or a performance, where art doesn't just move us, but seems to alter our state. What's striking is that this is no longer just anecdotal. As many of you will know, there is a growing body of research, including the incredible work by Daisy Fancourt and others, showing that engagement with the arts can have measurable effects on our health, reducing stress, supporting mental well-being, even contributing to recovery. So the arts are starting to be understood not simply as something enriching, but as something closer to a health behaviour, part of how we look after ourselves. Of course, it's not totally straightforward, and that's really what this evening is about. We're fortunate to have speakers who come at this from very different angles. We'll hear about how creative health is being embedded into systems and communities in practical ways. We'll explore what it means to create the conditions in which people and communities can genuinely thrive, not through top-down provision, but through collaboration and engagement. We'll hear how the arts can open up space for difficult conversations within healthcare settings, topics that are often underrepresented or hard to approach. And importantly, we'll also be asked to look at more uncomfortable questions. If the arts can support health, who is supporting the artists? Because behind the beauty and the transcendence, there can also be strain, burnout, and financial vulnerability, realities that we don't always acknowledge. So this evening isn't about arriving at a simple answer to can the arts heal? It's about exploring how, when, and for whom they might. And perhaps thinking a little more carefully about what we mean by healing in the first place. I'm really delighted to introduce our speakers. Hollie Smith-Charles is Director of Creative Health and Change at Arts Council England. Hollie has particular interest in the potential of creativity and culture to tackle social inequalities, support well-being, and enable communities to thrive. Vincent is Managing Director of Oxford University's brand new Schwarzman Centre for the Humanities. And in her current role, Alex is responsible for the operation of the centre and establishing the new culture and schools programmes. Antonia Attwood is a visual artist and the artistic director of Creative Health Camden in London, an arts and wellbeing charity based in Kentish Town Health Centre. They work in partnership with the James Wigg Group practice on a social prescribing model. Antonia is also a visual artist exploring the phenomenology, thank you very much, of illness. And Dr. Raluca Matei is Research Associate in Health and Wellbeing at the King's Foundation. She's also a chartered psychologist and a former professional musician. Her work focuses on health promotion, the design and evaluation of complex health interventions, and the relationships between health and the performing arts. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to present their research, and at the end of all the presentation, there'll be lots of time for questions. So our first speaker is Hollie. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that kind invitation and for having me this evening. So this is a photo of a lady taking part in an annual Arts and Health Festival on the beach at Weston-super-Mare. And it's a partnership between a really brilliant organisation called Superculture, who are really looking at growing the arts and culture offer within Weston-super-Mare, and with the arts team at University Hospitals in Bristol and Weston. And I think it's a really lovely illustration of how creativity and culture are such a joyful, powerful and cost-effective way to support health and well-being wherever you live and whatever your age. And I think we hear that all the time through stories, through our own personal experience, and also through the data that's emerging. So I'm just going to say a few words about why this matters, why it matters to the Arts Council, and also how place-based and cross-disciplinary partnerships are really enabling creativity to become a key part of our health and care systems. There is now strong evidence from the UK and internationally about how the arts support good health through prevention, through supporting neighbourhood and population health, and through treatment, recovery and management of illness. I'm not a researcher, and the Arts Council kind of gets involved in some of it, but often we're there about translating it into policy and advocacy and making the case for why investment in culture really matters. Participation in arts and culture are increasingly understood as health behaviours, and they have benefits across the life course. Daisy Frankel, who's been mentioned already, and I suspect might come up again, she notes that the evidence now shows that creative activities are a pillar of health alongside diet, exercise and sleep, and should be recognised as such. People who engage with culture literally age more slowly than those that don't. If this was a pill, we'd all be buying it. And in fact, at current levels of cultural engagement, the improvement in UK adults' general health is valued at over £8 billion per year. Of course, though, it's not that straightforward. Even where the evidence is really robust, in order to shift things, in order to innovate, other things need to change as well. And what I've noticed, I've been at the Arts Council for about 3.5 years now, and the conversation is starting to move from whether this works and whether it's kind of worth investing in to how we can help embed the arts into health and care pathways. So I'm just going to give a couple of examples of place-based work, and what's happening in these places is different kinds of partners are coming together. So this isn't happening in a bubble. The arts are always a partner with other organisations, whether that's community groups, whether that might be the wider VCS sector, physical activity, and of course health and other community partners. So it's still patchy, but what we're seeing is that health systems, whether that's within local authorities or at systems level, are increasingly embedding creative health into their prevention and treatment pathways. So in Gloucestershire, Arts on Prescription has been iteratively gaining traction over the past 2 decades and is now part of the ICB's commissioning pathways for certain conditions. In Greater Manchester, which is the National Prevention Demonstrator now, this was the first city region to develop a dedicated creative health strategy, and this is now part of their Live Well prevention strategy across 10 boroughs. South Yorkshire, there's a picture there of their, they call it an enabling plan. It's sort of a toolkit for how they might go about embedding creative health into both NHS and their public health plans. And again, that's across 5 boroughs. And then in Birmingham, the public health team sponsors creative health research roles in 4 of the major arts organisations, using museums collections, contemporary art, music and theatre to address some of the entrenched population health challenges that the city faces. So we're looking at it at that kind of systems level, but also at a national level as well. Because what now needs to happen is that we move beyond this kind of postcode lottery to make creativity and culture part of all health and wellbeing in all places. So in partnership with the Bearing Foundation, we're funding the National Centre for Creative Health, and Alex, the director, lives in Oxford and is here, to deliver what we're calling the Creative Health Leads programme over 4 years. And this is an innovative national initiative to really connect local systems with national policy and to see how we might go about innovating in those kind of complex systems to embed creative health within the mainstream. So NCCH will be match funding leadership roles in about 25 to 30 systems across England, as well as a national role at the Department for Health and Social Care. And the goals of this programme are to really move creative health from isolated innovation and really good practice to sustained system-wide change, and to generate national learning about how creative health is commissioned, how it can support neighbourhood health, and to contribute to health system transformation. Can the arts heal? You won't be surprised to hear that I think, yes, they can. And I think that if we can work creatively and collaboratively and sort of straddle the worlds, if you like, straddle the different languages of arts and health at both a local and a national level, then I think there's some really promising seeds starting to kind of germinate that helping to build the trust and the competencies and the policy shifts that are necessary to make culture right at the heart of 21st century health and care. Thanks very much.
So, actually, I do. I need to move on to. It's all right. Oh, no, other way. See that. That's why I haven't done slides, because I can't be trusted with the technology. So you get to look at this rather than pretty pictures. So can the arts heal? Well, I'm not going to dwell on that particular question, because I think there's a weight of evidence that already shows us that yes, the arts can heal. When I was at the Arts and Humanities Research Council, we funded plenty of research that demonstrated that yes, the arts can heal. So we funded researchers like Helen Chatterjee and Daisy Fancourt, in fact. So I think that name is going to come up again and again. And yes, there is good solid evidence that the arts can heal. But there are such big barriers to everybody being able to access the arts. And I think that's where I will dwell in my talk. It's not that long ago, that 6 years, we had a pandemic, and we all realised just how invaluable the arts were to our own health as they started disappearing, as you couldn't go to the theatre, as you couldn't go to museums, you couldn't go to arts galleries. A bit of research that we funded at the Arts and Humanities Research Council, pandemic and beyond, demonstrated that value of the arts and showed how during the pandemic we needed the arts really to heal from our own trauma that we went through during that. So they helped us to connect. When we were isolated in our own homes, actually being able to access the arts in whatever ways we could helped us through those feelings of isolation. They helped in the recovery process from the pandemic. But there are still lots more barriers that we face on a day-to-day basis. If we look at the research published by Equity in March of this year, it showed that local government funding had fallen by 55% across Britain in the last 16 years, by over half. So how do people access arts if they're not being funded in their local community? Also, if we look at research by the Sutton Trust published in 2024, there's so many more barriers. For example, if you want to access a career in the creative industries, then you really do need to have an upper middle class background, or be privately educated. So over 50% of creative students at Oxford, Cambridge, King's College, London, Bath are from upper middle class backgrounds. 31% of senior people in TV, film and music attended private schools. And in fact, if we look at Oxford in particular, only 5% of those studying music or art actually come from a working class background. So this means that the stories and experiences we're seeing through music, through film, through television, are those of the middle class or the upper middle class. They're not being told from the perspective of those who are experiencing those stories. And it's really important that actually we allow people to have their own voice and that they can see themselves depicted in the arts, in the culture around us. If we think 43% of classical musicians attended a private school compared to just 8% of pop stars. So who are people going to be able to actually connect with and feel that connection, be able to access that art, the culture, and actually really begin to benefit and to heal? So the lack of these role models mean people don't identify, they feel excluded. They go, well, classical art's not for me. I'm not even going to bother to try, and they switch off. It becomes a political issue as well. And there were some headlines a few weeks ago about we should actually stop subsidising entry to museums or galleries or exhibitions for those on universal credit. We're making it even more difficult for people to access the art and the culture that could give them great mental health benefits, healing benefits. What do we do? And I think it's really important that rather than just look at the problem, we think about the solution. So the Sutton Trust has called for more incentives to study creative subjects, something at the heart of what we feel in the Schwarzman Centre. And some of these subjects are beginning to get eradicated from state school education. Music teachers, art teachers, they're becoming an add-on rather than completely embedded in the curriculum. There are disincentives to people studying these courses or specialising in them. My daughter's just about to enter a primary education degree, and she can do specialisms in maths, in computer science, but she wants to do music. No, that's an add-on. Oh, everybody does singing, love. But if you can play the piano, we'd really like it. So actually, where can we make sure that our next generation of teachers are coming through with those skills that are really, really important? There's been suggestions of introducing an arts premium for those on free school meals. But does that in itself create a stigma? You're only then able to access these things if you have that intervention. And we know that actually free school meals is something that people don't like taking up because of how they might be treated. So the Schwarzman Centre. We have an opportunity here in Oxford. We've just opened the doors to a brand new, completely different type of experience building within Oxford. It's designed to be fully open to the public, the ground floor, the performance spaces. We're creating a schools programme that's not just about schools recruitment, which is where the University of Oxford normally goes to. It's about creating the pipeline of students. This is actually about starting early, making sure that children, young people understand the benefits, can understand how the arts, music can really help their mental health, well-being and their healing. We're setting up resources. We're engaging with the local schools, the local state schools around us on their own terms, rather than saying, come on, we know how to do this. We're saying, well, how can we help you? And we had 130 children on our stage having their very first experience of a singing festival. They loved it and they all want to come back. We're creating opportunities for developing skills so that talent pipeline's there, not just through our students, but through apprenticeships, through CPD, through making sure that children through the National Saturday School who we're in conversations with can actually show that there are careers. If you've not experienced the fact that there are careers in the arts, how do you even know to aspire to them? And then we're working with the community, and I can see some of my colleagues from the cultural programme in the audience as well. We've just had last Saturday our open house. We threw open the doors, we put on performances, diverse range of different art forms. And the audiences that came weren't just what you would expect and maybe attend a university event. And I say that very carefully because we're here at a university event. But we had families, we had diversity, it was just beautiful to see. We had about 12,000 people through the doors. We're also working with the Lees, cultural democracy, so actively engaging everybody how they want to be engaged, not going out as Gown and saying, hello, how would you like to do this? And that really shows the role of storytelling. So the last example I'll give before I overreach my 5 minutes is our Modern Slavery Policy and Evidence Centre, based within the Schwarzman Centre, who has a lived experience panel. And it's really important when you're going through trauma and you're having to tell your story to the different services who may help you again and again, and you're losing control of that story. You need to have the voice to be able to tell it yourself. So we're creating those opportunities to be for these different communities that might have barriers to have a voice and use that power of story and the arts to heal.
I think so. We'll be okay. Hi everyone, my name's Antonia Attwood. I'm here from Creative Health Camden. We're an arts and wellbeing charity based within Kentish Town Health Centre. Now, which way do I go? Yes, that way. So what do we do? There is so much I can talk about, and I'm going to focus my talk today. But to give you a kind of overview on what we do in the first few slides, Creative Health Camden improves the health and wellbeing through creative social activities, working in partnership with the James Wood Group Practice and other health and community services, using visual and performing arts, movement and activities in nature alongside personalised support. We curate exhibitions to widen access to art and to open conversations about health. We strive for inclusion and accessibility by focusing on those least likely to have access to creative opportunities, as well as using creative approaches to evaluation to support accountability and learning. So, in order to achieve this, we have 2 main strands of work that we deliver, the first being our workshops programme. Every week we run a number of creative workshops at the health centre for people living in the borough of Camden. Around 70% of our referrals for these workshops come through the James Wood Group Practice. However, we do take self-referrals and other referrals from Camden organisations. And here is a selection. I'm not talking about our workshop programmes today, but this is a selection of what we do. So every week we house Breathing for Wellbeing, Dance for Parkinson's, Drawn Together a Visual Arts Group, our wellbeing gardening sessions. We do staff and clinician wellbeing sessions. We have a youth hub. We have Engage Here, which is an arts programme for participants with learning disabilities and cognitive impairment. We have Social Chapler, which is a visual arts group for Bengali women, which is one of the highest serving populations in our community. And we have Freedom to Make, which is a knitting and textiles group. And they happen every week in our health centre. All of our activities are completely free and open to anybody living in the borough of Camden. However, no, wrong way. I'm here to talk today specifically about our exhibitions programme. So the other way we do this is our exhibitions programme. You can ask me more questions about our workshops programme later if you would like to. But within the health centre, we curate around 6 exhibitions a year, all made exploring the themes of community, wellbeing and health. We showcase the work made within our workshop programmes, as well as inviting local and regional artists to exhibit. This exhibition on the slide was from A Quiet Blue Wall by artist Laura Mahopi. One of the aims of the space is to brighten up our walls and make the centre feel exciting and vibrant. However, another counter aim to this is to open up hard and difficult questions that are not spoken enough about within health contexts. This exhibition is a showcase of 30 by 30 centimetre self-portrait blue paintings, Each represented a person who had died by suicide on that particular year, bringing a heavy yet important topic into a public space to be seen not only by 2,000 members of the general public who use the centre each month, but also to the clinical staff working on site there. This exhibition, I'm just going to run through a few of our exhibitions to give you some examples, but obviously there's loads more as well. This exhibition was an exhibition we hosted last year by photographic artist Africa Barrero Alexandra, who was exploring his experience with his own gender transition. It was important to him that this body of work was shown within a GP practice, as that's where his journey started. Due to the political conversations around gender transitioning in healthcare, the practice was quite sceptical about having this work shown, in case it brought any negativity. However, Africa and I felt it was important to depoliticize his journey and showcase a human experience in a poetic, nuanced and sensitive way. As a public building, we must be careful not to show explicit nudity, scarring and violence because of the buildings used of people from all ages, religions, cultures, genders and backgrounds, and you're not consenting as you walk through the door of a health centre to see anything like that. But the aim is to raise awareness and not offend or alienate people. We received only positive feedback, and it was highlighted how sensitively the show held the subject. To go alongside our exhibitions, we invite exhibiting artists to run a workshop with our clinical staff. We want to ensure these conversations are happening within the healthcare setting in a safe environment where everyone can ask questions and learn. The artists generously start by sharing their stories, navigating the healthcare system through their artwork. For example, Africa shared a photograph of origami cranes created from years of doctor's notes that went missing in the system, only to be found 5 years later, halting his access to care. Clinicians are invited to ask questions, to learn from the artist as a patient within a different context than an appointment where the clinician is there to act within a specific role. The clinicians then take part in a creative activity themselves to start thinking about how they respond to their own identity through photographic dialogue, using the camera as a tool for expression that enables them to think of their own relationship to the self. Oh, wrong way again. I'm going to do that every time. Another example of this is our current exhibition by artist Carly Abdi Notley, the title Inherited Bodies. It's exploring lived experiences of PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, POI, premature ovarian insufficiency, menopause, and severe PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, to question who determines and defines what is normal or dysfunctional. This exhibition's open space for complexity, asking how gender, diagnosis and language shape care, identity and belonging. It's not about the broken, but about the self and the self-autonomy for our body and our health, reclaimed through dialogue, creativity and connection. I felt it was important to programme this exhibition about women's health, as we know it's under-researched and underfunded and therefore often misunderstood. No, I've done it again. I'm going to do it every time. Again, in a similar way to open conversations around female health, we held a workshop with the clinical staff at the practice, starting with the showcasing of the work and talking about her own journey within the healthcare system, allowing questions to be asked around language and care use within a context of female health. It is important that the artists we are working in are in a place within their health journey where they are able to hold the curiosity of the clinicians. We as a team are also always in the background guiding and supporting the artists as well. It's having space to learn together without judgment or blame. The clinicians again were then led through an artistic collage making workshop, asking themselves how their bodies empower their own healthcare journey. Yes, I did it, the last slide. Lastly, I wanted to talk briefly about another current exhibition we have on. This is by an artist called Veronica Rowlands. It's called When I Let Her Out to Play, Expanding Memories. This exhibition looks at nostalgia, sensory memory, and the rediscovery of the inner child and the emotional tactility of play, exploring the stages of narcissistic abuse cycles. Through process, she observed the profound role of the inner child healing can play in recovery. Although these images are bright, fun, and fill the walls of the health centre with lots of colour, they have a darker undertone when you look closely or read further about the work. enabling people to interact in a way that feels accessible to them, simply enjoying the vibrancy and joy that they bring, or looking deeper and learning about the story that's more difficult to digest, but important nonetheless. There is so much more I could say. 5 minutes is way too short. I could talk about any one of those exhibitions for way longer and all of the other work we do. But I will leave you with the question that Raluca asked me to explore: how to use the arts to facilitate difficult conversations within with healthcare practitioners and within healthcare settings. Hopefully I've answered some of that in here in some capacity. Please feel free to come and talk to me about any of the work we do at Creative Health Camden, and come and visit us too. Our exhibitions are open to the public.
Amazing. Welcome to the dark side of the arts. Can I move this? I will end on a hopeful note, so don't worry, but do fasten your seatbelts because this will go extremely fast. Ironically, while the arts can support others' well-being, as Alex has alluded already to, artists often suffer because of the conditions in which their art is made. As a former professional violinist, I know these pressures firsthand. Musicians face mental health difficulties, performance anxiety, injury, hearing loss, burnout, loneliness, substance misuse and abuse, and elevated suicide risk. Musicians also face limited social support, financial and occupational insecurity, time away from family and friends, and high treatment costs. In training, these risks are intensified by authoritarian teaching practices, poor preparation for professional realities, rigid views of music, and the continued prevalence of abuse, harassment, and discrimination. So what are tertiary music institutions or schools do to protect musicians' health and well-being? We see counseling, physical therapy, online resources, external partnerships with healthcare professionals, and health education courses. I have spent the past decade developing some of these in the UK, South Africa, and Romania, and some are still running 10 years later. However, despite decades of research and growing awareness, health promotion remains fragmented, short-term, and entirely optional. More importantly, it focuses on individual behaviors and often leaves untouched the systems that shape musicians' health, the hierarchies, silences, traditions, and pedagogies linked to stress, pain, and abuse. So the question is not just what support do we offer, it is also what shared principles can make health promotion in music education coherent, systemic, and sustainable. So to address the latter, I began forming a working group that reflected the complexity of this issue. I invited people from medicine, public health, social sciences, humanities, law, disability studies, and performance science. I also brought together performers, composers, conductors, educators, researchers, music therapists, students, institutional leaders, orchestras, unions, and student organizations. The aim was simple: to get the right people in the same conversation, because musicians' health belongs to no single discipline and cannot be solved from one perspective alone. That is the value of co-design, sharing the agenda and decision-making with those affected by the issue and those who understand it from different angles. Over 9 months, we held around 25 interviews and group Zoom calls. The project brought together 125 contributors from 31 countries across 6 continents, resulting in a position paper with the first global recommendations for health promotion in tertiary music schools around the world. I will focus on the 2 most relevant recommendations. One of the main recommendations is that health should not be an add-on, but a lens for rethinking how we make music, teach music, and define musicianship. What if musicianship were measured not only by perfection, tradition, and technique, but by courage, creativity, connection, and sustainability? This means shifting away from obedience, adherence to tradition, and hyper-competition, and toward experimentation, autonomy, and social impact. We need institutions that connect music to audiences, communities, and purpose, embrace diverse artistic identities and careers, foster collaboration across the arts, sciences, health, and social prescribing, and protect artistic autonomy as a human right. Students are not just recipients of education, they are its future architects. We need to help them question assumptions, recognize how rules shape what is valued, and prepare them to lead in outreach, socially engaged work, administration, innovation, and advocacy. A music degree should prepare students for life, not only for the concert hall. And when used creatively, the arts can support not only musicians' well-being, but also the well-being of the communities they serve. As part of my role at the King's Foundation, I am overseeing the development of a new Center for Health and Wellbeing, and my hope is that this will also allow us to explore, potentially in more depth, how the arts can affect people's health, well-being, and sense of connection. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. The absolute brilliant things that you've been talking about. I have to just, while you're all formulating questions in your mind, I'm just going to quickly slip one in to Antonia. As a practicing artist, I was fascinated this idea of having exhibitions within a healthcare setting. Could you just tell us a tiny bit more the responses that patients had to the work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we collect responses by giving a feedback thing on the windows of our healthcare centre, and people can post tags. So if you actually look on Creative Health Camden social media, you'll see some of the written feedback from our participants. But there are a number of things. One are the staff who use the centre absolutely love it. Every time we're putting a new exhibition up, they're like, what's next, what next? We can't wait to see what's next. And it brings them joy to come to work, to see the new exhibitions. Most of the feedback we get is that people love colour, they love vibrancy, they want to brighten up their visit to a health centre, to make them feel happy and feel joy. That is definitely one element to it, and people do really love that. But also as a space to just simply distract sometimes when you're feeling anxious about going into a clinical space, you're feeling anxious about your appointment, to have something to visually look at, to ponder over, and as a conversation starter to say, actually, to your GP, something out there resonated with me. Maybe it was mental health, maybe it was something about physical health, but that resonated with me. And I think it's a really important part of opening up those conversations to say, actually, this health centre is a safe space for you to bring those conversations to us. And we're supportive of all of those conversations, whether it's, like we talked about, abuse, suicide, narcissistic abuse, transitioning, anything, gender, anything, we are open to talking about it. And just simply by having those exhibitions there, it's communicating that to patients.
Visual cues.
Hopefully, yeah. So joy and happiness and brightness, as well as conversation starters and distractions from a clinical, very scary place.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience? All very quiet. Oh, we have one over there.
I noticed there are no questions. I noticed there are no questions. This is an add-on rather than a question, because I'm interested in the how of the healing as well as the how do we put it in place. We all know the problems there. And I'm reminded of paratheatrical or high-energy performance practice where there are a lot of injuries, and also whether there could be great outpourings of grief. And if you performatize the group's willingness to help with the pain goes away. Now, I don't think this is subjective. I think what we have here is the operation of the reward system of the human neurological system. As we won't be surprised to hear, I think Shakespeare got there first, because in Julius Caesar, the plebeians are told that Caesar has left them in his will all your walks, your private arbours and new planted orchards this side Tiber, for you and to your heirs forever, common pleasures, to walk abroad and recreate yourselves. And I think that the recreate is absolutely essential. And it's no surprise that Buddha, Proust, Benjamin, among others, have all written about the effects of simply walking. Not walking to improve your physical health, but walking
Simply
to
walking.
improve yourself totally. And I'd like to end by saying that now walking as an artistic practice is firmly embedded in new performance.
Yeah.
It's not just something on the edge. It is a known part of new performance practice.
Thank you very much. Does anybody want to speak to that at all?
I just think to say that I completely agree, and I think a lot of the exhibitions I showed there were very much about heavy subjects, but actually so much of what we do at Creative Health Camden is process driven, and it's not always about being, talking about trauma or talking about different subjects. It's often just being in the creative space, being in a creative zone and doing something that's about processing through creativity, whether that's just planting a flower in our garden or whatever that may be. I think there's massive healing benefits to the process of being creative.
Thank you. Jonathan has a question at the front, then... Oh, no. Jonathan,
Yeah, thank you very much.
you're getting a speaker.
All
Microphone.
fascinating. I've always thought one of the best things about Kentish Town is the street art, or illegal graffiti, as it's sometimes referred to, saying "Welcome to Kentish Town" above the tube station. I thought it was brilliant what all of you are describing, what you're doing. To the extent that if a Martian or even someone from another country came in, they'd think, "Wow, Britain's absolutely blooming. There must be no problem here with racist parties or any depressed people or excluded communities. It's all everyone's doing art," which of course is the opposite of the truth, as we all know. We're in an absolutely horrific situation. So I'm just wondering how you sort of square those circles. And specifically, I think part of the reason we're in such a horrific position in this country at the moment is the complete erosion of community education and adult education, lifelong learning, which is how most people, working class people in the past, got access to art. So I just wonder what you think about that. And what connections you have with adult education, community education, lifelong learning, and what potential you think there is for us actually, improving things in this country so we don't have the horrific problems we've got of left behind communities and people just despondent and voting for Brexit just because they're annoyed with London.
So I was going to elaborate slightly on one of the examples that I was calling on in my talk, which is the work that we are doing with communities. And I think at the heart of that is proper collaboration and co-production. So I think the University of Oxford sometimes has maybe gone out and gone, hello, we know, we are the university. And instead now what we have done is this whole cultural democracy thing, which is about giving people voice. So allowing people to decide where, when, how they want to express themselves and their experiences. So working with the Lees, and there's two very important people who are actually doing this, and I'm actually speaking their own experience because they're our programming team. But working with theatre director Erica Wyman, going into the Lees and saying, well, how do you want to do arts and culture? How can we help you? How can we empower you? How can we make sure you've got the skills and the resources to do this, rather than assuming that we know the answer? And through that, the Lees Festival has been re-established this will be the third year that it's been running. And it's very much the festival that the Lees community want, not something the university wants, something they want. And coming out of that is now a piece of theatre that we hope will literally travel the city and take the voice, the experiences of those communities across the city into the Schwarzman Centre and allow other people to experience that. So I think that's how we do it. We give people the voice, not what we expect,
but what they want to express through their own experiences.
Thanks. Hollie?
Thanks. I was at an event yesterday, a sort of roundtable discussion with clinicians and policymakers and artists and all sorts of people, and someone in the room talked about how actually the Department for Health is actually the Department for Illness, and it's lots of other government departments that create health. So DCMS, which is our kind of department, so culture and sport, work and pensions and housing and local government and all these other areas. And I think to your point, we need to shift things away from kind of just that treating illness to actually building good health. And I think investing in the things that help to keep us healthy and sort of raising awareness of the things that, because I think if you ask people about what do you do to keep yourself well, I don't think the arts would often come up. I think people don't think of it in the same way as sort of, get 5 fruit and veg or a good night's sleep. And actually, we almost need to just make it a bit more of everyday, that kind of everyday creativity and taking part. And I think programmes like that, which are absolutely rooted in communities and are building with communities, programmes that make sense for them and that are meaningful for them, are really important. But then I think it's about that kind of raising awareness at the national policy level as well to kind of shift the dial. And I do think that's happened a little bit. So there's a new 10-year plan for health, and it talks a lot more openly about shifting towards prevention and shifting towards neighbourhood health. And I really believe that the arts have and culture have a role to play in that. I think libraries are just, there are more branches of libraries than there are McDonald's in England. And, these are these amazing, free at the point of use community assets. Like, what could we do to strengthen them as health creating environments, for example, and bringing creativity and things. So I think there are some seeds of hope, but yeah, I agree. I think we need to invest in those things that help us to be healthy.
Thanks, Hollie. Did you want to say something?
I don't think
You raised a really important question, Jonathan. Thanks for that. So I entirely agree with Hollie and Alex, and I think we need to also train artists so that they are more focused on the social impact of the art form, because usually they tend to focus on the purity of the art form, technical precision, historical authenticity, and traditions that may be, very fixed and rigid. So we need to start training them to pay attention to, not to wait for others to come to their art performances and exhibitions, but rather to make sure they are more interested in how normal people perceive the art, so that, we lower or we bridge this gap between high art or serious art, although I hate those labels, and audiences as well as communities. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Do you want to say anything, Antonia?
Just quickly, I'm going to say something that's really obvious and just invest in, I think that NHS 10 years plan is great, but I go to all these meetings that say, we're going to rely on the voluntary sector to deliver arts. And I think, okay, thanks, where's the cash? And so I'm just going to keep banging that drum that if you want us to support the 10-year plan, you have to invest in the arts organisations to deliver it for you. That's all.
Well said. Well said.
Hello there, my name's Asim Bandali. I work for the Lived Experience Advisory Forum here in Oxford as part of the Gatehouse. We're working alongside the community of homeless people. And so that last comment was particularly interesting to us about funding. The discussion we're having today is quite different to the discussion I've had with lay people here in Oxford. And the reality of the situation is, given the huge cuts in funding, especially in the arts, this is a very difficult period. It's interesting that we're having this discussion because in my own culture, things like the arts, shamanic people of old knew it was actually a cure for lots of ailments. But what's fascinating is the number of cuts we've had with libraries. We talk about libraries, but a lot of libraries, excuse me, are now being closed down in communities where children don't have access to books, music, the CDs, let alone classes in schools. And so it's how do you go about, raising the funds to create an environment people's voices are heard. It was interesting, Alexandra, that you mentioned about Leeds. It was Erica Wyman and myself had a conversation about the film that you put on which I was involved in working with from Oxford. But, organisations like that in the Oxford area are very few. And the homeless community especially are quite often overlooked. We do put creative writing courses on, we do put on photography workshops, but it all costs money, and the collaboration and the co-production that you speak about isn't always there. So I'm curious, actually, with the Camden project, in terms of if there's any kind of tips you can give us, so there can be a more joined-up discussion to get these funds. And the artists who put on these exhibitions, do they actually get paid?
Yes, they do.
Fantastic.
I will not pay people. That is 100% no.
Where do the funds come from?
Good question. Arts Council. We a portfolio funding. We have donations from an amazing patron, which is we're really, really lucky to do. So that is a way. I'm not really sure how everyone can do that. So that's probably fairly inaccessible. But Arts Council, National Lottery, Bearing Foundation, local Camden Authority gives us money. We apply for grants funding from lots of different places. Camden Islington Trust, Camden Giving. So yeah, local authority and other arts funding. We get in-kind funding from the NHS for the use of the space, so we don't pay any rent, electricity or gas bills, which as a charity is extremely helpful. Not many organisations and funders want to fund those kind of overheads, which enables us to exist at least, and then all of our funding can then go on the core costs of our salaries and projects to deliver projects, which is really, really helpful. So I think there's two things here. Space, especially if you're talking about somewhere like London, I assume it's going to be similar in Oxford, is very, very expensive for charities and organisations to actually put on community projects if you're having to pay for a space to do so. So providing space and building that into the healthcare building to have a community space that can be used for free is really, really important. We wouldn't be able to do the work we do without the building that we have to be able to deliver in it. And that was completely thanks to the chair of our charity, Dr. Roy McGregor, who was a GP at the practice, and when they built the building, he worked really closely with the architects to ensure that the space was there for us and that the charity existed with us inside the building to be able to deliver it. It's really, really difficult. It is really difficult. We are currently trying to do, so much of my work is just fundraising. I do all the time. I'm just constantly fundraising to keep projects going. It's over the last 2 years, I've seen how much more difficult, how many more rejections we do get from funders. It's really, really hard. I am currently trying to do a piece of work to actually, because we are partnered with the GP practice, we're in a space where we could actually kind of look at the cost benefit analysis for GPs and how much, say, would a GP appointment cost, or what's the reduction in medications, to actually say we know it's cheaper, hopefully, but again, doing more research to prove how much, if the healthcare systems invest into these services, what they will get back from it, and actually hopefully show that there is massive benefits that they're going to get back, and it's going to be cost effective for them. So I don't know the answer to your question because it's really, really difficult. But
thanks for being encouraging.
Life a lot. So let's hope. I think if we keep going and we keep having proving that it's working, then and shouting that it's working, then hopefully people will listen.
Does anybody else want to speak to that?
I'm not good. It's a really tough funding environment, and the competition for funding, I know that it's not just Arts Council, but lots of trusts and foundations, the number of applications are through the roof. But I think this health economic point is really important, and I think that's where, when I talked about shifting from does it work to how do you implement it, I think this is a really key point around demonstrating the cost effectiveness of it. And yes, there's been this kind of mega study which DCMS published, which is where that 8 billion number comes from. But we're also seeing kind of individual conditions, and that might be another way through. So, for example, singing for postnatal depression, or dance for falls prevention. There's some work that's been happening around specific interventions and specific conditions, and I think as that kind of body of evidence grows up, that will help to build the case as well. But I agree, it's sort of still reliant on individual champions and systems. So looking at how we can kind of systematise it feels like the kind of journey that we need to be on.
Thanks, Hollie. We have a question here.
Hello. I've got probably 3 points to make to 3 of you. I'm sorry, Hollie, we met in the car park, but let's make it different. So I'm very interested by everything all of you say, so I'm just going to introduce myself so that it makes sense. So I think it was Alexandra who mentioned that 5% of art students today in the top universities are working class, which is obviously a very shocking proportion. So I'll introduce myself. I was from a working class background, but a very long time ago when society was very different. I was a student here in the music faculty in Oxford, and I was a performer as an organist for many years. And I watched musicians and their relationship with music over a very long time, having studied at 2 conservatoires, one in the UK, imagine, and one abroad. Very different experiences. But after those 10 years, having watched this, I became a music therapist. And I have worked as an HCP registered music therapist for the last 30 years in NHS, in education, and on an independent basis. So just one thing I wanted to say to Alexandra, we were at that open day on Saturday. I think there may be some glimmers of hope in education, in that with the dropping of the E back, there is a resurgence. There have been some increased numbers recently, but of course we're facing a horrible gap in the chain, which is there won't be enough music teachers, or probably arts teachers in general. And I would just so love to see much more encouragement of these students. And I've actually been talking to 2 music students today because I was doing a lunchtime recital, and that they really should be encouraged to go into state education, to go into primary education, because if it doesn't start young, you've lost it by secondary. And any of us around my age will have had experiences in the English school system free as a child. But there are some glimmers of hope, I think. Now, the other point I was going to make was the lady from Camden, Antonia, that's right. I was going to ask something that somebody else said, is who is funding your leaders? Because I have also fought for funding on many occasions, but I have seen tremendous benefits in active music therapy, in the very difficult end of mental health, having worked in central London in acute, inpatient and forensic mental health for some time. There are enormous benefits in using music, which is a non-verbal medium, across cultures and across people with immense difficulties in communicating. And I did notice that your programme, and it might be because music is always more difficult to run, didn't show any music. I just want to say that back in the 90s, there was a community music therapy group in Marylebone, and it was very successful. It was run from a church, and it was extremely successful. I strongly suspect funding was the issue, but it would be brilliant to see the sort of borders crossed a bit more between the jobs that are available for arts therapists and the community practice. And that is a constant debate that goes on in the arts therapies. Essentially, almost everyone I've ever worked with is funded through public funds, directly or indirectly. So, for example, from disability benefits and things. So I was just going to move on to, sorry, I'm hoping to say your name right. Is it Raluca? Raluca. I was really interested in what you have said, presenting that picture of conservatoire. And I know there is a real battle to be fought here, because conservatoires, and plenty of experience of those in the UK, are on an immense drive to attract top students, to talk a great deal about talent with no definition of what that really is. Talent does not come without an immense amount of privilege and work that goes right back into childhood. And they're on an immense drive to maintain their status, to attract huge amounts of international funding from students. But one thing that has always interested me would be to work with music therapy with musicians. Because I think what is often not recognised about musicians is that music is essentially a very integral part of their personality. And when you talk about the very high end, so we might be thinking about violinists, we might be thinking about pianists, we might be thinking about cellists, they have often started their instruments in the very early stages of childhood development. So it has become integrated into their entire personality development. When you talk about wind players, brass players, they've often started that much later. That is occurring at a time in their development when they are much more aware of who they are and how they are developing. But I think one of the major difficulties is if you, and I'd love to hear more ideas about this, is if you were to work with musicians themselves, it's a little bit like a psychotherapist might work with a relationship you're having trouble with. But in this case, the relationship is between the parts of yourself. It's between your own music and your external engagement with it as a profession. So I'd just be interested to know whether out of all your research there are actually thoughts of interventions, and whether, because I actually trained at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, where of course the music therapists are not integrated with the whole college. And that's
shall we just let them have a, perhaps we could just broaden the question a little bit around music and music interactions within these programs that you're running. Raluca, do you want to just answer that first question?
Sure. You've raised so many different points. I'm happy to talk to you afterwards. But very briefly, I think there are very few interventions aimed at using music therapy for musicians in the specific context of addressing stage fright or performance anxiety. But you're right, we need more of this. And we also need to work with musicians because they have especially Western classical musicians, have very rigid approaches to music. And you've made another hugely important point about encouraging musicians to consider teaching. I don't think, unfortunately, at the moment, teaching is taken very seriously. Conservatoires attract performers, and we assume that they are also good teachers, and that's why we have all sorts of instances of harassment and abuse, unfortunately. And pedagogy is not seen as prestigious as being a soloist or playing in an orchestra, unfortunately. So absolutely, I think we need to question all these assumptions as part of performing artists training. But there is so much more to be said anyway.
Yeah, I agree. We don't have the funding to do every single form of arts that we would like to do. We do have a community choir who come and sing in our centre every week. And we also have live music as part of our Dance for Parkinson's programme. So every week we have a live musician in the sessions that they dance to. But yeah, I mean, again, the question comes down to I would love to be able to cover every single art form to make sure that everybody has what they want. And it does come down to funding and capacity and time and space capacity as well that we have.
Thank you. Could we finish, Alex, with you, perhaps talking a little bit about the music programme at the Schwarzman? What great stuff are you doing with music?
Well, talk to me after, and I'll say more on that. I was just going to go slightly off piste.
Go off piste, absolutely.
On the point about teachers, I don't necessarily think it's about getting our musicians into primary education. I think it's about looking at the curriculum with teaching those new teachers and making sure that they are equipped with the skills. And I think what we can do in the Schwarzman is make sure that we're giving resources to enable some of that curriculum through our schools programme. At the moment, that is not in the primary education teaching syllabus at all. They're teaching maths, English, it's not music and art. So actually we need a fundamental change there. But have a look on our website, schwarzmancentre.ox.ac.uk, if you want to look at all of the amazing different things. And it is a really diverse programme. So from dance through to hip hop, through to all sorts of other things that you would expect in terms of classical music, spoken word. There's some really good provocations around 1776 and the state of the US at the moment. So do have a look.
That's great. Can we please say thank you to our speakers for being absolutely brilliant? Thank you. There are drinks at the back of the room. What else am I supposed to say? You doing it?
Just extend thanks to the speakers and to you, Fiona. Thanks so much for chairing. Let's all continue the conversation over a drink at the back. But just to say, our next GCHU seminar will be week 8. And we're going to be addressing the topic of tomorrow's sustainable cities, and in particular, what lessons from small towns and villages for that sustainability argument in the future. So do join us. That is Wednesday, the 17th of June, same time, same place. Do join us there. And also, I mean, if you can't wait until the 17th of June and you enjoyed this, do come along to the Kellogg Conversations, which are a new series just being launched this term. The first one is next Wednesday, Wednesday the 6th, same time, same place, same format, 4 speakers, short provocations, and then, you know, up to you, the audience, to get involved. So do come along to that. And just to let you know, the theme of next Wednesday's one, 6th of May, is Lessons in Resilience: What Nature and Heritage Teach Us About Building a Sustainable Future. So I'm sure it's going to be fascinating. So do come along to that if you're free. And if not, the week 8 one, 17th of June, we look forward to seeing you there. So let's all have a drink at the back. Thanks very much to everyone.